Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a central dynamic in Karl Marx's Capital, the production of surplus value. You see, Marx points to two main strategies that capital uses to maximize this value. Think of them as two engines that are always driving the system forward. We're going to break down both of these, absolute and relative surplus value.
Okay, Marx is being deliberately provocative here, right? This whole vampire metaphor isn't just for show. It really frames capital not as some static object, but as a dynamic force, a social relationship that has to keep expanding. And how does it expand? Well, by extracting value from its one and only source, living labor. So the big question that capital is really trying to answer is how this process of extraction isn't just maintained, but constantly pushed to its limits.
All right, Section 1, the engine of capitalism. Before we get into the new stuff, let's do a quick recap on the foundational concept here, which is surplus value itself. So at its heart, surplus value is the value a worker produces above and beyond the cost of keeping them able to work. See, labor power, the worker's ability to work, is treated like any other commodity. Its value is just the cost of food, shelter, and whatever else the worker needs to show up again tomorrow. The wage covers that cost, but the value they create during their shift, that's much, much greater. And that difference, which goes to the capitalist, well, that's surplus value. It's the source code of all profit in this system.
Marx asks us to picture the working day as being split into two parts. The first part is what he calls necessary labor time. This is the chunk of the day where the worker is basically earning their own wage, producing enough value to cover the cost of their labor power. But once that's done, they don't clock out. They keep working. And this second part of the day, surplus labor time, is where all the value they create is pure surplus value for the capitalist.
And this brings us to this simple ratio, S over V. For Marx, this is the precise mathematical formula for the rate of surplus value, or what he flat out calls the rate of exploitation. S is the surplus labor, V is the necessary labor. And the entire drive of capitalism, all the competition, all the accumulation, boils down to one single goal, making this ratio as big as possible.
So, this presents a really clear strategic problem for the capitalist. If you want to increase this ratio, you've got two basic moves. You can either make the numerator, S, bigger, or you can make the denominator, V, smaller. And this simple choice gives rise to the two powerful strategies for generating surplus value that we're about to explore.
So, Section 2. Let's look at that first strategy, the long day. This method goes after the numerator in our little fraction, and it's what Marx calls the production of absolute surplus value.
This approach is, well, it's brutally straightforward. You increase surplus value by simply making the working day longer. If the necessary labor time stays the same, then every extra hour of work is a pure, unadulterated hour of surplus labor. This strategy doesn't mess with how work gets done, it just changes how long you have to do it.
Let's look at the math here. Say you've got a standard 10-hour day, and let's say 8 of those hours are necessary labor. That leaves 2 hours for surplus labor. The rate of surplus value is 2 over 8, or 25%. Okay, now what if the capitalist just extends the workday to 12 hours? The necessary time doesn't change, it still takes 8 hours to earn that wage. But now the surplus labor time has doubled to 4 hours. Suddenly, the rate has rocketed up to 4 over 8, or 50%.
But, this strategy pretty quickly runs into some hard limits. For one, there are physical limits. A day only has 24 hours, and people need to sleep. But, and this is crucial, there are also social limits. As Marx shows in great detail, this whole period was defined by an intense struggle over the length of the workday, with workers fighting and organizing for legal limits. That constant resistance makes just endlessly stretching the day impossible.
So you hit this wall. If you can't just keep stretching the total length of the day, you have to find another way. And that leads to the question, maybe you can change the internal makeup of the day itself.
Which brings us to Section 3, the productive day. This is the second strategy, and the one Marx saw as way more revolutionary and dynamic. It's the production of relative surplus value. The focus here shifts from the length of the day to its internal productivity. So, with this strategy, the goal is to attack the denominator of our fraction, that necessary labor time,
How? By making labor more productive. And this is the key. It has to be an increase in productivity in the industries that make the stuff workers need to live, the things that determine the value of labor power. If new machines can make food, clothes, and housing in half the time, then the actual value of labor power falls, even if the worker's standard of living stays exactly the same. The logic here is like a chain reaction. It starts with one capitalist who brings in new tech to get a leg up on the competition. But then, to keep up, everyone else has to adopt the same technology. The result is that the whole industry becomes more productive, and the stuff it makes gets cheaper. And if that stuff is what workers buy to live, then poof, the value of labor power drops across the entire economy, and necessary labor time shrinks, all within a workday that hasn't gotten any longer.
Let's go back to our numbers. The workday is still fixed at 10 hours. Before, we had 8 hours of necessary labor and 2 hours of surplus. But after a technological leap in making consumer goods, it now only takes 6 hours for the worker to earn their wage. Look what happened. The capitalists just gained 2 hours of surplus labor. It doubled from 2 to 4, without adding a single minute to the clock. The rate of surplus value just shot up from 25% to over 66%. That's 4 over 6.
Okay, section 4. Two sides, same coin. So we've laid out these two very different ways of increasing surplus value. Now let's bring them together and see how they really operate as one unified system.
This table really makes the comparison clear. The tactics are different, how they affect necessary labor is different, but the goal, extending surplus labor time, is exactly the same. Now I want you to focus on that last row because it's a really crucial distinction. Absolute surplus value is based on what Marx calls the formal subsumption of labor. This is where capital basically takes over an existing work process, like an old handicraft, and just makes the worker do it for longer. But relative surplus value, that requires the real subsumption of labor. Here, capital has to grab hold of, reshape, and completely revolutionize the production process itself, using science, technology, and new ways of organizing work. This is a much, much deeper level of control.
And Marx himself brings it all home right here. He says whether you do it through a longer day, that's absolute surplus value, or through making work more productive and intense, that's relative surplus value, the effect is the same. Both strategies increase the amount of surplus product and therefore surplus value that you can squeeze out of labor in a set amount of time. That is the one and only driving purpose of production under capital.
Now for our final section, the never-ending drive. And this is so important. These two methods aren't just a menu of options you can pick from. Marx's analysis shows they're part of a restless, relentless dynamic that is constantly pushing the system forward.
The really crucial thing to get here is their dialectical relationship. They aren't just alternatives, they actually produce each other. Think about it. Historically, when workers succeeded in limiting the workday, when they blocked the path of absolute surplus value, that forced capital to get creative and innovate, which led to the methods of relative surplus value. But then, the very same machinery that boosts productivity also allows for work to be intensified, to pack more labor, more effort into every single hour. And that intensification, Marx argues, starts to look a lot like making the day longer, just in a new disguise. So the two methods are locked in this perpetual cycle, each one creating the conditions for the other.
So this leaves us with a final question to think about. How does this framework from the 1800s help us understand our own world of work today? Where do you see this dynamic playing out? You could think about the gig economy's constant demand for you to be available. That feels a lot like the absolute extension of work time, doesn't it? Or what about productivity tracking software and AI management that intensifies every moment of an employee's day? That sounds an awful lot like a modern form of relative surplus value. It really seems that Marx's two engines, even though their forms have changed, are still humming away, powering the dynamics of our economy.